Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. So happy to have each and every one of you back here today. Today we've got a special guest and another special guest, but this guy's pretty interesting. I've had a couple conversations with him now and excited to kind of share what is going on in his world with all of the listeners. So we've got Matthew Johnson. Matthew is the president of, we were just discussing that, he's the president / director / maybe a little bit of everything, I guess. He's with the Sustainable Ascents Foundation. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Happy to have you here. Did I get that right? President, director?
Yes. Yeah.
Everything, man of many hats.
Yeah, that's what happens with nonprofits getting built up. A lot of people do a lot of jobs.
You know, it's you mentioned nonprofit specifically, but I've kind of noticed that in my own business as well. It feels like it's nonprofit most of the time, but definitely a bunch of different hats. So, but that's pretty cool. So, Matthew, what we're going to do, we're going to jump back into kind of your story because I find that the people I chat with have an interesting story. How did they get from where they were to where they are now? But I also think that before we do that, let's give our listeners kind of the 30, 60-second elevator pitch for what is the Sustainable Ascents Foundation so that then they can, stick around and learn a little bit more about it when we get to that point in your life. So how's that sound? So what's the elevator pitch?
I guess the elevator pitch is we're trying to change the way that climbing development is done around the world into a model where people coming in from the outside partner with the individuals, the locals on the ground from day one. We empower them to make their decisions as to how development is done in the land where they live so that the climbing development money doesn't go to foreign climbing organizations exclusively. We try to bring all the local people in from day one so that they feel empowered, they're engaged, and the money stays in the villages to the extent possible.
It's a great thing. We've had a few guests on the show that we've had a couple conversations around the different organizations and how do they as operators ensure that they're, that the people that are on the ground carrying things up the side of the mountain, as well as just the other people in the community that support it. So it's a big thing. So I look forward to circling back to that point and discussing that more. And how the heck did you get from where you were to where you are now? I don't know how far back we need to go. Sometimes we go back to young childhood. Sometimes it's high school, whatever. So how far do you think we need to go back so our listeners can understand what got you into this?
I got here very accidentally, so I'll give the quick version. I grew up in Marquetta on the south shore of Lake Superior, Upper Michigan. My childhood was pretty free range. It looked like that 1986 movie Stand By Me with the kids running down the railroad track looking for a body. That was my childhood and never.
That's my favorite movie. That's my favorite all-time movie. I don't know why, but something about it. So I can relate to that. All right. Very cool.
I didn't start really traveling till my 30s, but my first trip was actually to Kilimanjaro and decided I wanted to bring my own equipment, do my own work because I grew up as like a Midwestern backpacker. And since I had all my own gear, I thought I could do as I pleased on the mountain, which meant instead of setting my tent up in the campsites with all the tourists, I set it up in the campsites with all the workers every night, which made for like a really immersive, travel experience that just really bit me. And from there, it was just a few more trips in the mountains, ended up in the North Caucasus on a private exploratory deal, found some beautiful alpine valleys with, rural pastoral communities that had very little economic activity, but great potential. And from there, I just kind of got an idea about trying to set up a model where climbers benefited, the communities benefited. I reached out to the Alpine Club and British Mountaineering Council in the UK, German Alpine Club, got some feedback, ended up talking to Nathaniel J. Meniger, who is the man who started the Mountain Worker Initiative at the UIAA, the International Climbing Body. After input from all those people, I decided to start a company to actually do this thing.
Very cool. We're going to come back and touch and go deeper into that, but I have a feeling we missed a few things because we jumped from Stand By Me to climbing Mount Kilimanjaro with all the guides. So I just imagine that there's some stuff that happened in between there. So let's go back to when you were a kid. You said you kind of free range, you're out and about doing stuff. Did you have family or people around you that were influencing you to do the hiking and that stuff? I mean, just tell us a little bit more about that if you don't mind.
An active outdoor family, but not one that traveled. So I spent a lot of time just on the family property on my grandfather's farm, trout fishing, running around with friends. And by the time high school and college came, I was backpacking. And the leap from backpacking to climbing was simply my own inherent impatience. I had a 10-day, 100-mile solo loop planned for the Bob Marshall in Montana. And about a month before I was supposed to go, I tore my Achilles. I was unable to go. And I really wanted to get in the mountains, did not want to wait an entire another year before I could go off climbing by myself in the mountains. And so just jumped on Google and was like mountain trek, January, February, tried to find options and came back with Kilimanjaro. I was like, oh, I never thought of that. I guess I'll do my first solo international travel.
So that was your first trip outside of the US.
I did a trip in high school with my German class, but that was my first actual independent travel.
Okay. All right. So when you went with the German class, presumably to Germany.
Yes.
I don't want to make too many assumptions, but that's
right.
Would be my best guess. Either that or maybe Namibia or something like that. But how long were you in Germany?
It was 3 weeks, I think, 3.5 weeks.
Okay.
During the summer break.
Do you remember thinking, wow, this being traveling stuff is pretty cool, or was it?
Not at that time. No.
No?
I was homesick. I was used to being able to run around with friends and dogs, and the class trip was completely scripted. So I didn't see my friends half of the time because we were all in our own individual host families, and my host family was way out in the countryside. So for me, it was a bit of a shock. I wasn't quite ready.
And actually, I've had a few conversations with people that did the, something in school, went for a few weeks and had kind of a not so exciting experience. And then it kind of years later, all of a sudden, this desire to go travel kind of came back in. So when you were in high school, college, you weren't really thinking about international travel? Just wasn't, just hiking, backpacking, fishing?
Nobody in my friend group traveled outside of the US. Maybe a few random trips with family didn't get talked about much. None of my close friends traveled. We were, country boys, deer hunting, trout fishing.
Yep. Well, I can relate to that. I grew up in Wyoming, so the fishing and the hunting and all that stuff was a big part of my life as well. Very cool. So tell me this, Matthew. What'd you end up studying in school? I'm just trying to get a feel for what kind of interesting. Okay. All right. Did that
ever enjoyed it?
Did that? Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to ask this because we have a wide variety of listeners. I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but all right. So I guess the question I was going to ask you is, did that help prepare you for mountain climbing and charitable work and all that stuff, or was it totally? Was a totally different direction.
It was. Let's see. So nothing I did prior to the travel prepared me for it at all. I didn't have much exposure to even the concept of charity work or international travel. It was just the random experience of going to Kilimanjaro on a whim and living in the workers' camps. And I got to see how different the lifestyles of the workers were versus the usually rather affluent Westerners who are there. I know when you go to Kili, you have to hire a guide legally. The company, the country wants people to get jobs. So I hired a guy just to walk next to me and keep me company, essentially. But I
Did
parallel the
you? I'm
group.
curious. I'm curious about this, Matthew, because I've done a fair amount of guiding and I've spent a lot of time with guides. And I'll just share when someone would hire me in Montana to go fishing, when I was a fishing guide there, every once in a while you get somebody who would show up and say, look, I know how to fish. I just need you to row the boat. Like you almost kind of sounded like I just need you to walk next to me because I legally have to have you here. And sometimes the guide is like, boy, here we go. Do you have any recollection of what that guide was thinking when you hired him and said, just walk next to me? You don't need to do anything. Just follow me up the mountain.
He seemed to accept it. I did tell him that I didn't want to accept any help of any form on the mountain, if possible.
Okay.
I brought all my own food. I brought my own expedition medicine, everything I would need. And he's probably the first 2 to 3 days he kept trying to give me food, which I wouldn't take. But the fun part came where the guides and porters for the other companies starting to take interest in this really weird Mizungu who was carrying his own bag up the long Lamosha route, because I want to do the long route to acclimatize and then climb the Western Breach and camp on the summit. My thought was, I've come a long ways to see this mountain. I don't want to do the standard thing where you leave at midnight, climb all night, spend 15 minutes at sunrise taking selfies, and then go home. I want to climb the breach, and I'm going to put my tent up at the crater, hang out and spend some time.
I honestly didn't know you could camp on top. Is that, I guess you can. If you've got your own guide and doing your own thing.
They will, you can hire them to do that. It's just not popular. People usually try to save money, do the fastest route up, which means they're not acclimatized. And then sleeping at that altitude, if you've only been on the mountain for 3 days, you're going to probably get sick.
That's true. And I suspect that, I don't know, I haven't done Kilimanjaro. I've worked with clients that offer Kilimanjaro trips. So I'm a little familiar with it, but I suspect that a lot of people that do it, you get up there, you've got the picture with the big sign on top. You take your picture, you're done. You've kind of, do you think that's the case? You've been around mountain climbers enough. I mean, there are an awful lot of them just, I want to get to the top, take a picture, prove that I was there, and they're maybe not able to really fully appreciate the experience, or am I off base?
It depends on their motivation. A lot of people, more of the casual climber, they'll do something like that so they can tell people that they did, put it on social media. When you get into people who really enjoy spending time in the mountains, looking for new routes, exploring, the summit is usually secondary. You're there for the adventure, for the experience. And like for myself and for my friends, we'd rather make it halfway up a new route and turn around than summit an old route, take a picture and go home.
All right. You don't sound like, I shouldn't say this. Maybe I'll edit this out later when I think about it, but you don't sound like an engineer type. And I guess I should explain. I see you on the camera, so your face kind of, what do you mean, Jason? In the sense that when you mentioned really experience it and, and hanging out with the guides, in the camp. And I think sometimes I think of the engineer types as like, okay, let's just, it's feels a little bit more mechanical. I'm going to regret this. I'm not going to edit this out. I don't edit this stuff. But anyway, I love that you're really about the experience. And do you want to say anything to that, or should we just move right on?
Well, to clarify, I don't work as an engineer. It never worked for me. I'm now a truck driver.
Okay. Well, that's kind of what I meant when you said I didn't really like the engineering, and now when you're describing what you're doing, I'm like, yeah, I can see where maybe that wouldn't have been.
But the aptitude plays a role, because the organizational bit where, rather than relying on the guide, like I want to research expedition medicine and bring 13 different prescriptions with me and a suture kit and all the different foods. And my diet for each campsite is planned for the altitude, depending on how much oxygen I'll have to digest different types of food.
All right, there's the engineer in you.
Yes.
And you're right. Actually, when you mentioned that, you said I brought all my stuff, and you mentioned specifically the medical stuff. I was thinking, yeah, that does sound a little bit more like an engineer. So that's a good mix, and probably pretty important if you're not going to hire a guide to help you.
Right.
All right, that's pretty cool. What I really want to ask you is, if Kili was in Georgia, and it was a good thing to do in January or February, go to Georgia and climb it, do you think you ever would have left the country?
So you're thinking Georgia, United States state.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's an important distinction.
Yes.
Because we're going
I've been to the other.
I know. We're going to have a conversation about the Caucasus. And so I shouldn't have said Georgia. I should have said Alabama. Let's rephrase it.
At that height, I think I would have considered it because I didn't have any experience on mountains. And so it's a natural first dabbling at altitude to see how you respond. So it still makes sense as a starter.
So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, going to Africa, was that any drive? It was just like, no, there's a big mountain, a high mountain. I want to go climb a big high mountain. That's a good time of year to do it. Or did you even care that it was in Africa? I'm just curious.
It was, my Achilles was going to be healed in January enough to climb a mountain, and I didn't want to wait till August to do it in the United States.
I'm just going to go find a mountain.
I found one in the Southern Hemisphere where I didn't have to wait.
All right. That's kind of what I got out of it. And the reason I'm asking is because I sense, both in our previous conversations and in this conversation, that you kind of enjoyed the cultural aspect and the people.
That was way better than the climb itself.
I want to get into that, because you go up the mountain, you were camping with the guides and the porters and all that stuff. You really had an opportunity to see a unique, sounds like a very unique experience, the kind of experience I like to have. And in your own words, how did that impact your life and your decisions from that moment on?
It taught me that solo international travel was not nearly as scary as I thought it was going to be. It was really engaged with the local community on the mountain. It opened my eyes also to the disparities in privilege and wealth in international travel. A group that I was on a similar schedule with for a few days had 11 white Westerners. They had 84 locals working for them. And these locals would be carrying hard folding tables on their heads up the mountain ahead of these foreign tourists. And the foreign tourists would have a little child's school backpack on, talking about how they're big mountain climbers. As 84 Africans ran up the trail so that there'd be a fresh fruit spread waiting for them at 10 a.m. for morning tea. And my thought was, I understand there's a market for that, but that's not what I'm here for. I wanted to see the mountain. I wanted to see this little tiny piece of Africa. And luckily for me, all the workers on the mountain thought I was kind of a two-headed mule and got really curious. By the time I got to my normally would be high camp for people, was my second highest camp below the summit, I was invited into a tent with all the senior guides, or maybe 6 or 7 companies represented, and between them it had been at least 8 years apparently since a white person had carried their own bag to the top, which for me was shocking, coming from a backpacking Midwesterner where that's just what you do on a week off. So
would it feel really weird for you to let somebody else carry your stuff? I mean, that just that would be, no? Okay.
It wouldn't feel weird. It's just, for me, I wanted to know if I can do it.
Yeah.
The trip I have planned to the Caucasus in September, we're actually using horses from the local Karachai community because they're trying to give employment to the local people there. And, I've done twice a traverse of that peak where I carried my own 100-liter bag over the summit. I know I can do it. But this time we're going to bring camera gear and a little more fun stuff, and we're going to give some jobs to the local community in the process. So yeah, I'm fine with that.
Actually, that's a good point. I'm happy you brought up, is giving the jobs to the local community, because that's a big part of what your organization's all about. And I'm going to go back to when you said there was a group of 11. I've spent too much time in South America. I want to say the word gringos.
Right.
11 tourists. And
Yeah, so the African version of gringo is Mzungu.
okay. And you mentioned that.
MZUNGU, it means traveler, but it's kind of also honky.
Yeah. And I heard you say 84 Africans
Yep.
running up the mountain before them to make sure they had a nice food spread. So there's two ways to look at that. One is this really right? This seems a little bit privileged or whatever. But then there's also the flip side is those are 84 Africans that are probably, I don't know, presumably happy to have the work. So how do you reconcile that with, encouraging people to go and not be so dependent on other people, but at the same time, support the local communities? You've thought about this a lot more than I have.
I have.
So, yeah.
I would say one, hire them directly rather than having the bulk of the money go to the middleman.
Mm-hmm.
And two, include them in the process of the climb as a team member so they feel respected and part of the climbing community. On Kilimanjaro, it's still very, very segregated. For each of the preset campsites on the different routes, the overwhelmingly white tourists have a nice campsite. And for each location, the overwhelmingly black workers set up their tents literally as far away as is practical, frequently out of sight lower down in the mountain. And then they only come to the white people's camp to do a minstrel show song and dance routine in the evening, which for me was very embarrassing.
Okay. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Were they highly encouraged by their bosses to to go camp out of sight, out of mind type of thing? Or because I'm curious, because I remember when I was guiding, sometimes I really wanted to get away from my clients. I didn't admit that because some of my clients are probably listening to this right now, past clients. But sometimes it's like, you know what? I'd rather be out of sight, out of mind, because then I can kind of have my own peace and quiet. But I'm guessing that's not really what you experienced.
It did not have that feel at all. It was, this is where the people with money sleep and the workers don't intrude.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I got that feel from them too. The first few days, they were curious, but they kept their distance from me. It was only by day 3 or 4 where they recognized that I had been respectful enough to learn some Swahili before I traveled, and that I wanted to do my work and I sit down, eat all my meals with them, and spend all of my time with them on the trail rather than walking with the other foreign tourists, that they eventually opened up and felt comfortable. And by the end, it turned into a really wonderful experience because all these other workers from companies that I didn't hire kept vying for my attention. Like, hey, we don't normally show the clients this thing. We keep this to ourselves, but come check this out. They each wanted to find, see who had the coolest thing they could show me. And I forget the translation there. They wanted to call me in Swahili the lion of the mountain. And I insisted they change it to mule or donkey because I was strong and stubborn, but not very bright, apparently. And they absolutely love that.
What you're describing to me is like a really cool experience. I'm wondering, because I've spent some time in Africa, I've spent some time in a lot of places, and I really, really like to get close to the locals. I would love to and I've done it before. I've gone hang out with the guides and the other guests are, sitting down at the dinner table eating really great. And in my opinion, I'm eating really great with the guides because it's more interesting, the conversations and just being part of that. And I'm wondering if I were to ask you what percentage of the climbers, this is just your guess. I know you don't know the numbers, or maybe you do. What percentage of the climbers do you think would really prefer to have an experience more connected to the guides? I'm not asking this question very well. I think you know where I'm going with it.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
Here's what I imagine the client from North America that's like, man, I really want to hang out with the guides. I want to get to know them, da 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 da. But everybody else, it's like, I got to follow the plan because the plan is that when we get to camp, the guides or the staff is going to take great care of us and then they're going to go away. and I wish they'd stick around, but that's not the plan, and I don't want to disrupt the plan, but I'd really like to spend time. So I don't know. So what's your take on, do you think a lot of climbers would like to have more interaction? Or
I
is that a
think
tough sell?
maybe 10 or 20% of the people that I climbed next to were arguing about the best season for Mallorca. So it wasn't kind of the immersive travel group. It was, but there's so many people who go to Gili or like to the South Road on Elbrus because it's non-technical and it's famous in a certain area. I think the majority of people are looking to check a box for social media. The people who really are looking for that immersive travel are either kind of shoestring, dirtbag climber backpackers who do it just by nature. They're hitchhiking across 7 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Or it would be your ultra high-end tourist that's looking for a real immersive ecotourism option that's going to be 5 figures a week.
Right. Because it sounds like, and you've thought this out. It as I'm listening to you and thinking about this, if you said, okay, we're going to offer a trip up Gili, and the guides and the porters are all going to sleep in the nicer accommodations in the nicer camp, and they're going to just hang out with us, and we're all going to eat the same food and just have a great time. I suspect there's an expense involved, as a tour operator that does Kili treks would probably say, oh yeah, well then the cost is going to be twice as much if we're treating the guides like clients, and nobody's going to pay for that.
I
What do you
paid full
think?
price. I paid full freight,
Okay.
but I did it myself, even though I paid the full deal. I paid for the porters, I paid for the food, but I just told them not to give it to me once I got there.
And you slept with them in their camp. So presumably, if you'd wanted to, you could have slept. What I hear you saying is if you'd wanted to go sleep next to the other tourists, I'm just throwing that, other climbers, you could have went over and slept there at the same
I
level
had my own tent, my
they
own
had.
sleeping bag. I had everything. I could have camped
That's
anywhere I
true.
wanted.
That's true.
I think they were shocked
Okay.
when I put my tent down in the workers' camp the first night.
I love it, man. I get it completely. It's very cool. So how do we get more people to do it the way you did it? Or what's the goal? Because it sounds like that's what's the goal of the foundation.
So what we're doing is, okay, say it's going to be more of a niche market for like alpine climbers, international alpine climbers. What we're doing, at least initially, no, it's big mountain, high altitude, the sort of climbers who drop 30 grand climbing in the Himalaya. That's just simply an easier lift for me. When you're going to communities that where households make, 2,000-3,000 US dollars a year, mass tourism isn't going to work for them. We don't want 5 or 10,000 tourists a year in these villages, but 20 a week, maybe during the climbing season of climbers who are used to the big, expensive international alpine climbs. Those climbers in modest numbers can change lives in these communities, or they're impactful enough individually to make a difference without overwhelming, the smaller mountain communities.
So how does a not-for-profit organization make that happen?
So we have built a team of people from quite a few countries now. We have people from Brazil, the US, the UK, France, Turkey, Jordan, and South Africa.
Okay.
And very connected climbers, parts of the core national climbing clubs. Some of them have their own companies, and they can actually talk to basically friends and climbing groups to begin to bring in their own, native local club organizations to travel like this. So then just the idea is to build it small and controlled kind of organically, where we get the right people in, where we have a slow enough growth that we can build up waste management systems, housing infrastructure, whether it's homestays, bunk houses, alpine shelters, so that grows in a sustainable way that the communities can handle, and that begins to give, economic opportunity to them without alienating them by having a big horde of foreigners all of a sudden show up, one random June.
Okay. No, that's cool. I remember I had a conversation with someone here on the show. I think it was Chris from VIP, something they do. It's a not for profit. And she was explaining some of the challenges as a not for profit organizing trips or promoting trips or marketing trips. Or so when I hear you talk about this, I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, how do you get people that are willing to pay to go do it without marketing it as an adventure, as a tour, as a trip? And what's the long term? I mean, do you need to find companies, tour operators that are responsible and then involve them in it? I'm just trying to figure out what the plan is.
So it's a kind of a difficult nonprofit model because every place we're going to is its own animal. It's a complete bespoke operation depending on the location. So in the North Caucasus, on the west side of Elbrus, the Karachai communities there, they understand tourism. There's a lot of tourism on the south and east side of the mountain that they're aware of. None of that money makes it to the west side. It's essentially Vale and Breckenridge on the southeast side of the mountain, and rural Tennessee from 1910 on the west side of the mountain. Oh, and they have a really good guest culture as part of their tradition. So in their old Karachai tradition, there are only two things that a man could do to get cast out of the community. One of that's to offend a guest. And the further a guest has traveled, the more honored they are to host you. I had read this and knew it intellectually before I went there, but when I showed up on a subsequent trip with my partner from London, by the end of day 2, we were being told we were supposed to come to the village on day 3. We were up at like a little log cabin in the mountains. And what we didn't know is they shut down the valley and put on a cultural festival in her honor because an American and a British gentleman had flown thousands of miles to see their land and learn about their culture. And they gave us the VIP treatment of you couldn't imagine. So it's a great place for for alpine clubs to bring people for serious rock climbing and alpine climbing. And it's rugged and it's beautiful. It's absolutely like Switzerland 200 years ago before it was developed for climbing. Small-ish numbers in the hundreds, or eventually maybe up to a little over 1,000 in a climbing season would be all that would be needed for them.
Okay. So how do you make that happen as the foundation? Do you promote these areas to alpine clubs, tour operator? I'm just trying to figure out, or do you raise money? I mean, like, listeners to this show right now, what do you hope that they will take away from this? Is it, hey, we're doing great stuff, help us do it either by partnering with your time or money, or go with us, or what would you like to happen?
We can give trip beta to anybody who's interested. We have contacts in the valley. We do organize trips. We're going this September and we're going to be filming, a climbing documentary to showcase the area for climbing film festivals. And between the Alpine Club in the UK, several people that we have involved that have their own tour companies, it's really more of a niche adventure travel location. You can bring a family, one of the parents, to do alpine climbing. There's great technical rock climbing routes. You can do horse trekking. It's not a place for 30,000 people a year like the south side of the mountain. It's a place for, a couple hundred people a week who are going to immerse themselves in the local community and provide some actual economic activities. This area it's a Karachai ethnic group. They settled these valleys in the late Bronze Age and spent 3,000 years fighting off the Ottomans and the Persians, and the Russians. And they were finally conquered by Moscow in the 1860s. And things have gone downhill a lot since then. So we're trying to provide an economic lifeline to this ethnic group so that, 3,500 year old culture that's really at risk without economic help, that culture could be gone in 5+ generations. So we're using kind of high-end climbing to give them, a reason to stay and not move off to Russian cities.
Is this, and I may not be pronouncing right, is it Ossetia or Ossetia? Is it in this region or close to that?
It's not far. That's, a province in Georgia to the south that Russia has occupied. If you look where like the Ukraine war is on the north side of the Black Sea, if you go right to the exact like east end of the Black Sea and draw a line straight east, you go through land until you hit the Caspian Sea. There's an east-west mountain chain there. That's the Caucasus. The north side is Russia. They have 7 semi-autonomous republics. The southwest is Georgia. The southeast is Azerbaijan, and then Armenia is like
right. And the area that we're talking about is on the Russian side, right? Correct.
It's just on the Russian side by 5 miles, just outside of the controlled technical border zone.
Okay. All right. It's a very interesting area. It might not sound like it, but I have done a little research, and it's an area that Georgia is on my list. It's like the next spot, man. I'm all about going to Georgia. And actually, this is a little unrelated, but there was an Ossetian, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but restaurant in Quito. I was walking through Quito not too long ago, and I saw this restaurant. I'm like, what the heck? And they had some of the Georgian food and all this stuff, and I was so excited. I went and got my friend. We got to go back. They've got Georgian food there. So anyway, it's a cool area. Sorry about that. We got distracted. But so what I hear you saying is what we'd like is to give some exposure to the area so that some responsible operators or alpine clubs can go in and help out the economy and experience something amazing. That's right. Did I say that right? That's kind of what you'd like to happen.
And it's going to grow. The idea is to grow it slowly over the next 5+ years. So both myself and one of my partners, Mark Higdon from London, we're both fellows at the Royal Geographical Society. So we're hoping to use the Royal Geographical Society and some of the UK's university climbing and travel groups to start to bring foreign students into the area for exchanges, to get to do projects with the local communities, bring people back to the UK or the US, and kind of slowly grow the interconnections between the local communities and the broader, international, mostly Western for us, adventure travelers and climbers. And so that it becomes a thing where, instead of going on a safari in South Africa, no, this is just another option for the more adventurous traveler to go and, see this area that has seen up until now very, very few foreigners. I mean, if you think of like mountain climbing, it really didn't become a thing until the 1870s, 1880s. And then, World War I, the Soviet Union formed. We're not getting a lot of foreign travelers into there. The Soviet Union collapses in 91, and then they have the war with Chechnya just to the east. So it's a very unstable region. They have another war around, 2000 or so. And so there weren't any foreign travelers going into these semi-autonomous regions in the North Caucasus, from World War I through 2010. So there's just no exposure. No one's been there. It's from a European, North American, South American perspective, it's kind of no man's land. I assume that one of the valleys that I went in, I was maybe the second or third American who's ever set foot there, which is wild.
Okay, so I've got a pretty clear picture of what you'd like to happen, but I suspect there's a few things. One thing you mentioned you would not want to happen is you don't want the people that live there to have to move to Russian cities and just abandon their history and their culture. But I suspect there's other things that you'd see as a potential risk of happening that maybe keep you up at night as you're trying to figure out how do we slowly develop this? Because I keep hearing you say kind of slowly, sustainably, responsibly. So what's that thing that keeps you up at night? Or what's that thing you might wake up in the middle of the night with a nightmare? Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened and we were part of it and on some level. So like talking on a podcast, Like, oh my gosh, what if the wrong person hears this and goes in there and tries to do something that disrupts all of it?
I had two worries initially. Both I think we've found a way to operate with now. One was having the foreigners come in, would this change this ancient culture? And I had to get over the fact that I'm trying to decide for them what's good for them. It's not my job to make that decision for them. If we're going to empower them and give them the decision-making authority, that's their choice. So they can make their own choice, whatever that is. The other concern was the business environment in Russia, where corruption is a real thing, both organized crime and semi-organized through government offices, where people like to take a cut of a business. So what we had to figure out with friends, locals in the valley was, how can we organize a version of tourism that minimizes the option for outside bad actors to come and take a cut for like a protection racket?
Okay.
And a lot of that is simply using essentially like home, not online booking, but you could book online but not pay online, staying in a small guest house, paying cash, staying, doing homestays, everything where you're actually handing, small amounts of cash directly to local individuals. Like when I went, I wanted some meat to make shashlik, which is their version of shish kebab. So I got an older farming couple to take me out into the communal grazing grounds. We rounded up their sheep. I picked out a lamb. It's a Muslim community, so we just had to take out a hunting knife and halal slaughter, cut the neck right there in the field, cut it up, bring it back, age it. I didn't go to a market. I didn't pay with a credit card. I handed cash to an old man and his wife in a farm field. No one could take a cut of that.
Do you have concerns? And if you do, nobody's going to hear this because you're going to say yes, and then we're going to edit it out. But my question is, do you have concerns about talking about stuff like Russian political issues or corruption and that type of thing?
It's all in the open. It's not secret.
They don't care. Like,
No.
yeah, Matthew, whatever. You're a smart guy. You figured us out. Ha ha. We're not going to change. We don't care. We're not going to come after you. It's just.
Oh, they came after me. I've been interrogated several times over there. My longest interrogation was 7 hours.
Okay, so next time they interrogate you and they go to Google and type in, Matthew Johnson, and this podcast episode comes up, are you concerned about that?
No, it's performative. They're upset. It's all just checking a box in case someone in Moscow, did you ask the question? That I won't say who did what when I was there, but one of the individuals who was involved in the interrogation ended up buying my friends and I drinks after hours. And another person from the Russian court process, who, again, I won't say what role they had, but they took us out to lunch at probably the nicest restaurant in town after we got out of our false trial. So there's no hard feeling. Right. It's all performative.
All right. That's fascinating.
And it makes a great story in the bar afterwards.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm sure. So we've been talking about Russia, the Northern Caucasus. I know there's some other areas you have specific interest in as well. Should we touch on any of those?
I would like to briefly talk about our new project in Bolivia. We originally were going to do the Russia as a one-off project, and then we put things on hold for the war, and eventually decided, we should maybe take this model and expand it. So the second place we found is the Aymara ethnic community in northwest Bolivia. I ended up going there in July of last year, 24, with a researcher and all local partners on the ground to look at kind of the living conditions and the climbing opportunities in the area. Really an open door for us. The Bolivian Catholic University in La Paz has started a program in sustainable tourism. There is a regional Catholic church in Peñas on the Altiplano that the priest is actually an Italian alpinist. He's been there about 15 years and has been teaching the local kids rock climbing and, kind of adventure travel. So they're all open to this kind of concept when I showed up.
Mhm.
The Aymara people are very, at least the ones out in the villages, the rural villages, are very suspicious of outsiders, not foreigners, like any outsider. They've been mistreated since the Spanish conquered the area 450 years ago. And it was only the introductions through the church and the university that got us entree to some other remote villages. And we had to work out tourism that they were comfortable with, that would be sustainable for their communities. And what we really ended up with was resuming alpine climbing. They had been largely stopped. They had been disrespected enough and alienated by travelers that they kept people out for the better part of 25 years by force. So it's a region that got very little climbing. And we came in and gave them the ability to make decisions what they wanted. The initial ask was just, please give us money to rebuild our school and rebuild the road. But our approach was, no, we're going to give you a ongoing funding stream that you can use to fix the school, fix the roads, feed the old people. And what ended up working was they're going to create in each of the villages a new elected position to actually manage the tourism. We're working to build trekking and climbing shelters. The operation will be overseen by the satellite campus of the university that has been set up on the church grounds in Peñas. But the operations will be done by the villagers. All the profits will go to the village communal coffers that will be used for the school and the roads and whatever other needs they happen to have. And now, because they are actually running the tourism on their own land, they feel very happy to bring people in as equal partners in the tourism industry rather than being ignored and pushed aside. And then for that reason, try to keep people out.
It makes a lot of sense. I had a conversation with someone in the Amazon in Colombia not too long ago that I guess was kind of obvious to me, but it was really interesting to have that conversation with them there because they're explaining that as they shift more and more towards tourism, they have a tendency to kind of leave some of their old practices behind, or instead of farming, maybe it's like, hey, instead of farming, let's do Amazon tours. Or instead of, running a boat up and down the river, transporting products from Leticia to Iquitos or whatever, maybe I'll do birding tours. So they shift so much into the tourism that then when something happens, like COVID, it's like all of a sudden, wow, they've got all, the tourists quit coming and they don't have the systems in place that they had before. And it was really a struggle. So they learned from COVID that we need to not have so much dependence, figure out how do we benefit from the tourism without being overly dependent on it. And I suspect this is something you've given a lot of thought to with the organization. I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts or anything on that? Because I think it's an interesting topic.
It is. I would say for both of our first two initial locations, I think it's less of a challenge because tourism isn't such a foreign concept in these locations.
It's never going to be that. Okay.
Yeah, it's not that stark of a change. Like they've seen the tourism in communities in the region. They've seen the travelers. They've seen what they don't like, but they've also seen things that they're interested in. We're not starting from scratch. Like, oh, here's this thing called tourism. It's like, well, here's the thing you're fully aware of. How do we do it in a way that works for your community? And again, in the end, choosing not to kind of take a paternalistic approach and say, like, maybe you should keep your own culture and keep you pristine, and we can come and look at you from a distance and take pictures. Or look at this ancient culture that hasn't changed, and maybe they want to change in some ways. It's their community, like they get to make the decisions.
Well, that was what I was thinking when this conversation came up. It's like, okay, it's great to conceptualize that a problem was created, but for somebody from outside the community to come in and say, well, you know what, we're going to limit tourism for you so that you don't get too dependent on it. That's kind of a screwed up situation too. Like you said, the paternal thing. It's like if we say, well, we're going to limit the number of people that can come into your community so that you don't have a problem down the road. but we're the ones making that decision on your behalf, and that's problematic, right? I think that's really
I guess we get to make our own choices too. So, my choice is to bring groups in gradually,
Mhm.
hopefully to make it easier for communities to adjust. You know,
Right.
that's just myself and my friends and my connections. If, the community wants to advertise and get an Instagram account and a Facebook group and do what they want, that's, I, who am I to say no? I just know I'm going to try to, with the part that I do, I'm going to try to do gently, gradually, so that I'm not creating a problem that I can foresee from day one.
Is, as a leader in the tourism industry, if you go in there and say, well, we want to have filet mignon and lobster in the jungle, and try and change their whole way of doing things, they're going to quit growing the manioc, they're going to quit growing the corn, they're going to try and figure out how do we ship the stuff in, and then it's like you're going in and trying to bring what you left back home with you as a tourist, as opposed to just going in and experiencing what they're already doing anyway. I mean,
And that's a part I didn't bring up. So for what I was working with the priest in Peñas in Bolivia was where do we go next year and the year after that and the year after that? And the goal that we worked on between, myself, my group, the villagers, the university, the church, the regional tourism director for the Bolivian government, was to try to kind of broaden the tourism options, not like a hyper focus on any one thing, but a real, think of it like a wide, shallow tourism field where maybe you go climbing, maybe you spend a few days in a village learning to cook traditional dishes with the local grandma. But if you spend time in Montana or wherever, you can go out and learn how they do. I'm sorry, llamas. I got corrected, not llamas, llamas. Try to find a way to get a larger percentage of the community engaged in the tourism process, so it's not just the 20-something young men who are getting jobs and everybody else is kind of getting sidelined.
and that's an interesting thing as well. Culturally, when you have an area where you've got tourism comes in, you've got, I mean, you mentioned the 20 young men, and it reminded me of when I lived in Belize, and we had other people working around the tourism, but those guys were, the fishing guides. They were fly fishing guides in Belize. And man, they were just like the gold chains and the cool baseball caps and the Nike shoes. And they were
balling.
They were the thing. They were balling, as my son would say. Yeah, they were balling. And it was, but it also created some challenges, some real issues. And if you can kind of help the community get involved where you don't just have the 20 young men that are, but I guess it's better than doing some of the other things they could be doing, because there's other communities where you've got the 20 young men that are doing I don't know. So
that's also some of the riskiest, your riskiest demographic in almost any community.
Yeah. And I can tell you, these guys, I love them to death, but they were fiercely protective of their status. They were at the top of the status ladder, and they were fiercely protective and competitive with each other. But that, again, I don't know what the answer is there. It's just an observation, I guess. I'm sure you've seen it as well. Did you see that with the guides in Africa on your first trip? Did you see the pecking order?
There was a definite pecking order. The senior guides were, minor celebrities on the mountain, and porters and just the kind of the grunt workers. They didn't even, honestly, they were uncomfortable making conversation with me for the first several days because I think they thought they'd get in trouble.
Well, yeah, and that's probably, I mean, I don't know, we're analyzing this, but I guess if you're the top guide, you're the big deal on the mountain, you'd kind of want all the porters and all the other guides off in a camp, out of sight, out of mind, because they're interacting with your clients, or, maybe interfering with your ability to get tips, or I don't know. Do you think that might be a kind of something that they're
Kilimanjaro, a place like Yeah, Kilimanjaro is such an established culture that would be very hard to change. There's a reason I didn't try to go into an established place and try to tell people that what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
I'm choosing places that nothing, it's essentially nothing or close to nothing exists. And we can work in partnership with the communities to say what is going to, you know, be good for the local culture, for the local experience, and let's build that thing from day one. Let's work on community involvement from day one. Let's make sure we have proper waste management from day one. Since we're kind of creating a new system in each of these locations, we can see what's been done previously and try to avoid at least some of the worst practices before they get ingrained.
Yeah. Yep. There's one, it's a little bit off of this track, but there's something I saw recently about some climbers that were using, different chemicals to help them with the acclimation. And I don't remember all the details, but it was on Everest. Is that something is that something you want to discuss?
So it's for people doing that, I don't think kind of weekend warriors would try anything that unusual. Most of your classic mountain tourism is going to be people who've climbed in groups, but have kind of followed the lead of a guide. Or you'll have someone who's very experienced, doesn't use a guide, knows what they're doing, and is anything they're going to try like that, they're trying from a very informed base. So, yeah, I don't see, other than a very small minority of wealthy people who, the sort of people who will helicopter into Everest Base Camp instead of trekking, they might pay or cajole or bribe someone to give them access to something like that. I think it was xenon gas in this case.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. But
you don't see it as the climbing world is going to be overrun with all these people now because it's getting so easy to do it that, you're going to have 4 times as many people on the top of Everest.
The research is really mixed on it. The bulk of the research says it doesn't help much. So I think the people who use it, I had
read that as well. Yeah.
I think the people who use it were already very good climbers. They, I believe, used oxygen deprivation tents. It's supposed to be altitude simulators, but it's not actually reducing air pressure. It's just reducing the concentration of oxygen. So it's not really the same thing for acclimatization, but it's supposed to help if you do it at least 16 hours a day or more. Anything less than it, the effect's supposed to be very minimal.
That sounds miserable.
Yeah, it's more like you're
being able to breathe very well.
This sleeping in a tent, you're working in a home office with it. If you're only doing it 8 hours a day, the results are very poor on average. But I mean, the more dangerous thing is people taking like dexamethasone. So when you travel to altitude, you need certain medications. 2 of the big killers for climbers are pulmonary edema and cerebral edema. Pulmonary edema is where your body interprets the reduced air pressure as an injury to the lung tissue and increases blood flow and pressure, and you end up leaking fluids through your lungs. You drown on your own fluids. Horrible way to die. So you have to carry a specific medication for that allows you to self-evacuate. The other big one is where cerebral edema, where your brain swells, but it's contained in a hard case, your skull. There's nowhere for it to go. You rapidly become you seem like you're drunk, and you collapse and you die. So the drug you take to reduce the effects of that for hopefully enough time to self-evacuate to a lower altitude is dexamethasone, which is a steroid.
Mm-hmm.
Climbers, I carry it on everyone. I carry drugs for both of those on every single one of mine. I don't take them as a performance aid. You can take dexamethasone as a performance aid before you get pulmonary edema to kind of give you a boost on the mountain. Some climbers do that. It's a drug, it's a steroid, it carries a risk. And then if you do get cerebral edema, you don't have a backup because you're already. So it's a performance enhancer that significantly increases your risk if you use it inappropriately. So there's always options.
Because it could I'm just thinking out loud here. It could create a situation where you're performing better than you should be, almost. So you get into that dangerous place a lot quicker, and then when you've got a problem, you don't have, you don't have any way to treat it. It reminds me of when I was young. My dad, when I was growing up, he'd always teach me, try not to use the 4-wheel drive on your vehicle unless you really need to.
Exactly.
You know,
I grew up with the same advice. Four-wheel drives for getting out of the mud, not into the mud.
Yeah, because if you use it to get into the mud, then you're screwed. Your chances, you're just not going to be able to get out. Without a lot of extra effort and tools. So anyway, fascinating conversation. I feel like you and I could just keep going on and on. I've got so many questions. Maybe we need to come back and do this again. I want to ask one more question before I open it up to anything I forgot. But I think I really want to make sure we're clear on anybody that's listening to this, regardless, what would you like them to do? If they're listening to this saying, man, this guy's got some cool ideas of cool places. He talked about Bolivia, talked about the Caucasus. I'd like to go to one of those places, or I've got a climbing club or something. They want to connect with you. Your website link's going to be in the show notes. But what kind of people are you hoping will reach out to you? Maybe I just said it. I don't know.
No, that's part of it, is the climbers and travelers. But honestly, we have kind of opportunities for people at different levels. If you just want to get involved with a project like this, because we're growing, we have roles like we're going to need a social media person within the next year. We're eventually going to need someone to help manage, donor relations. So we have volunteer roles. We have places where we can go if you're interested in doing this type of thing, but you're not an alpinist. You don't have to be an alpinist. That's just my personal approach and my buddies, which got our attention. But you can go to these areas. You can do trekking. You can do horse camping. There's fishing, beautiful photography. It's an immersive place where there's options, as long as you're into the outdoors and you're not looking for a place where the spa treatment comes to your room. There's options, right? And
okay.
The communities are happy to
get
work on whatever those are.
And it's the person that's just pretty adventurous and wants to really get off the beaten path and do something pretty cool. It sounds like you're at least willing to engage in some sort of conversation. Maybe communities, maybe somebody's going to listen to this, probably not in a really remote mountainous community that hasn't seen any Americans for a while. They're probably not listening, but yeah, very cool.
Well, so like, we're not, it's a nonprofit. We're not trying to make money. We're trying to just sustain our operations. But I am very happy if someone has tour companies, and they're looking to get engaged in these areas. And, I think they operate responsibly. I'm more than happy to make the connections and help them bring their businesses into these areas. Like, we want to bring people in. My group just happens to have the on the ground knowledge and the local connections. I would be very pleased to be the bridge between some tour operators and some of these more adventurous locations. So if you got a company or you're individual, a club, whatever, reach out to me. My email's on the website. Yeah, I'm really happy I find it's a passion project for me. So
I can
if anybody is interested in this sort of thing, just hit me up. A week ago, I was at the Outside Summit in Denver, which is like Outdoor Retailer was, but now Outside Magazine took over a year ago for part of it, and made a ton of great connections there and trying to advertise this type of work. I'm now acquaintances with the people at the Global Climbing Initiative, amazing organization, globalclimbing.org, I believe is their website. They're setting up, they're helping to fund and equip local climbing clubs around the world. They go on YouTube. They just had a film, Climb Malawi, about the project that started in Malawi last year. Mario Stanley made the film. He's now going to be working with me. Super excited about that. But, there are organizations who do this kind of regenerative tourism, I think they call it now. And I am super happy to connect people in that space.
Well, I appreciate that, because I know we've got some tour operators listening that would that are always looking for cool, interesting stuff. Sustainability is very popular with the people that I think listen to this show anyway. So encourage anybody that's listening to go check out your website, get in touch with you. And thank you so much. Is there anything I forgot to ask you want to make absolutely sure that we put out there before we wrap it up, or did we do a good job?
Pretty good, but I would say as our group is kind of growing, we have guides from South America and the Middle East and South Africa. We have a certain knowledge base because of that. But if any of your listeners are aware of a location where this sort of development would be appropriate, we're always looking for new places. Like right now, I think our third project would probably be in the Spaghetti region of northern Georgia, close to Elbreth from the Georgian side. But we are definitely researching more projects for the years ahead. So I'm happy to both connect people to the places we know about and would be grateful for people to reach out and give us ideas to research for new locations.
Very cool. Very cool. Matthew, thank you so much.
I forgot one thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
before we
go ahead.
In Bolivia, we have 200 volunteers lined up to do work. We do have to fund the building material through the church. So anybody wants to get into a charity project where you're working through the Catholic Church in Bolivia or through us, we literally have 200 people lined up to do the construction if we can just get the rocks to the right place.
All right. Well, I'm happy we got that in. Thank you so much, Matthew. A real pleasure, great conversation, and I look forward to hopefully our paths will cross in person sometime soon. So thank you so much.
I would enjoy that. Thank you, Jason.
Right. Have a great day. Thanks.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.